Thank you very much, Nitzan. It's a great privilege being here today with you here in Jerusalem. And I would say that in the Middle East, you need a lot of imagination to understand what's going on, mainly during the last 7 years. Because what's going on in the last 7 years in the Middle East, it's a chaotic situation, an earthquake, by all means. Countries are crashing, whether it's Libya, Egypt crashed, rebuilt itself under Abdel Fattah Sisi, the current leader. Syria almost crashed, Iran crashed, Yemen crashed, Sudan crashed. And those who predict that we are just at the beginning of the end, I might say that from my point of view, we are just at the end of the beginning. So still ahead of us many issues, but we cannot speak about the Middle East without opening with Iran. Because when we need a lot of imagination, we need it in order to understand what's going on in Iran. And over the last 15, 20 years, every single development on the Iranian nuclear project was revealed by the Western intelligence services, and not even once Iran put on the table what's going on in their plan to have nuclear bombs. Before the agreement and after the agreement. Not even one case that they said we have a site for developing centrifuges or whatever. They were always surprised by information given by intelligence services. Yes, you're right, some of them by Israeli intelligence services. Not all of it, not the main part of it. And we need even more imagination to believe that in the future, even in the near future, Iran will share its developments and not be surprised by us, by the Western countries, when we speak about building nuclear capabilities. Iran, no doubt, plays a main role in the Middle East, although Iran is not an Arab country. Iran is a Muslim country, it's non-Arab, and it's not a Sunni, which represents 90% of the Muslims worldwide. Iran is a Shiite, and because they are playing a very main role in our region, I'll return to Iran later on because I want to go to the second part of our Middle East issue, I would say our Israeli problem, which means the Palestinians. And there is an inevitable question: why the peace process that started 24 years ago is blocked? Why can't we go forward? What blocks it? What happened that we have started with one Palestinian Authority, with one law in both West Bank and Gaza Strip, and one arm for internal security? What happened? And if we need imagination with the other countries, with the Palestinians, we need extra imagination. Because if I'm taking just from my experience some slight examples, when a suicide bomber years ago ran towards a group of Israelis, soldiers and civilians, shouted Allahu Akbar, God is great, and detonated himself with 10-kilogram explosives, TNT, on his back, thank God the TNT was taken from mines, didn't explode. What exploded was only the detonator. And the only man to be injured was the suicide bomber himself. He lost consciousness. He was taken to a hospital nearby. And after a few hours, the interrogator who came to question with him was waiting up until he's opening his eyes. And when he opened his eyes a few hours later, he looked at him and said, Mahmoud, the name of the suicide bomber, do you know where you are? He looked at him and said, definitely, in heaven. He told him, Mahmoud, it's not heaven, it's hospital. It's true, it's both starts with an H, but it's just hospital. So no way, I'm in heaven. And they started a negotiation about the relocation of the suicide bomber. True story. And after a few minutes, the interrogator understood it's going nowhere. He said, all right, Mahmoud, let's start from the beginning. And I mean, who am I? He looked at him and said, you're a bloody Jew. The interrogator was well experienced to bite his lips and said, very well, Mahmoud, you're right. I'm Jewish. But tell me, are there Jews in heaven? Said, hey, wait a minute, you're right, no Jews in heaven. So I must be in hospital. And he started to give information. And a female suicide bomber who suffered cancer got a special permit. We had two examples, 1 year ago and one just 2 years ago, even less than 2 years ago, that she got a special permit to cross from Gaza Strip of today, which is dominated by Hamas, the tough terror organization, with military equipment, that launched toward Israel almost 20,000 rockets over the last 15 years. And she got a special permit, and she used to cross to Beersheba Hospital for radiation. After the first round, Hamas recruited her and gave her a vest with explosives and told her, you're going to detonate yourself inside the Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, the hospital where she got medical treatment for cancer. She said, no problem. They told her, you get into the hospital, you look for a group of people, and over there you detonate yourself. But while you are going through the metal detector at the crossing from Gaza Strip to Israel, if the metal detector rings, you detonate yourself on the spot. And she said, no problem, but there is a slight problem. I'm crossing not by myself. I'm escorted by Palestinians who are going to medical treatment as well. So Hamas people told her, no problem. As long as you kill Israelis, you're allowed to kill some Palestinians. So she said, but why should it ring? You told me that the bomb contains no nails, no sharp nails. So they told her, you're right, but the detonator itself is still made. And we don't know the sensitivity of the metal detector, it might ring. So she thought for a while and said, hey, wait a minute. I broke my arm a few months ago. In Gaza hospital, they put me a piece of metal to strengthen the bone. Is it going to ring at the metal detector? I said, oh, thank you, updated us. It's for sure going to ring. They took her to a clinic, opened her arm, took out the piece of metal, closed it, and sent her to the crossing. You don't need it anymore, they told her. Thank God we got accurate previous information about a woman that's supposed to cross, and that's how she was arrested. And trust me, we can sit here the whole 4 days that you are spending here and telling stories that are reaching the absurd. But I think we have more sensitive and serious issues in dispute to deal about. One of the main problems between us and the Palestinians is to define who is a terrorist. If I ask you who is a terrorist, there's no problem. Osama bin Laden is a terrorist? No doubt. Suicide bomber who detonated himself, a terrorist who drove a truck in Berlin or in Nice, a suicide bomber or a terrorist with a knife who opened fire, he's a terrorist. Or he stabbed with a knife some people up until some other people killed him or detained him. He's a terrorist, no doubt about it. Amongst the Palestinian Authority, it's not the same. I don't know if you are aware of the fact that 7% of the Palestinian budget is being paid by law to terrorists. I mean, if you are a terrorist and you launch terror attacks and you were detained in Israel and you're sitting in Israeli jail, you get salary according to the Palestinian law. The more years you were sentenced in jail, the higher salary you get. We had one terrorist, 67 people got killed by bombs that he built. Abdallah Barghouti. 67 people got killed. He was sentenced in jail for 67 years. Unfortunately, we failed to kill him, and during the defensive field operation 15 years ago, we detained him. He was brought to justice and was sent to jail for 67 life imprisonment. This person, according to the Palestinian law, got paid during the 15 years more than 700,000 Israeli money, which is more than $200,000. The average salary of a terrorist in jail, or to a family of a terrorist that got killed, either as a suicide bomber who killed himself in order to kill others, or a terrorist who stabbed people and he was killed by a policeman or a security man. The average salary that such a terrorist gets is 3 times more than the average salary of a policeman in the Palestinian Authority. So you understand what's the incentive to go to be a policeman compared to be a terrorist. Absurds in our region, I thought it's only in our region. Why we are sitting here, 10,000 kilometers from here, in New York City, in New York University, NYU, there is a theater, a movie, a show that deals with an event that is well known to you, happened 15 years ago. April 2nd, 2002, I remember the day. I was head of Shin Bet at that time. I dealt with the event. 100 terrorists captured the Church of Nativity in Beit Lechem, took 40 monks and priests hostages, bought bombs and other rifles and means of warfare into the Church of Nativity. It was very easy for us as Israeli troops, security troops, to get in and to solve the problem. But the Church of Nativity would have been severely damaged. The terrorists would be killed or captured. But hostages from the staff and other people who are there are probably going to be killed or injured. And when I heard that it's a show in the NYU University that speaks about the 100 terrorists as innocent people that were kept as hostages by the State of Israel. I remember the day when Prime Minister at that time, Ariel Sharon, called me from New York, from Washington. He was about to meet with President Bush. And he called me and said, Avi, it was almost 7 weeks that the Church of Nativity was taken by 100 terrorists, some of them with blood on their hands. And he told me, Avi, finish this issue by tomorrow, because tomorrow we have a meeting, President Bush and myself. And whatever you reach with them, with Yasser Arafat, at that time the president of the Palestinian Authority, I'll back you. And President Bush will back you. I said, well, you know my conditions, and that's what I'm going to talk with Yasser Arafat. I called Yasser Arafat 2 o'clock in the morning. I knew he was awake this time. Don't ask me how. And we started to negotiate about it. I told him 13 terrorists who killed people mainly Israelis, but not only Israelis. 13 people are going to be expelled abroad to European countries who agreed to accept them. 26 terrorists who participated in an event that people got injured and killed are going to be expelled to Gaza Strip, which was, grosso modo, an area that they couldn't get into Israel, easily at least. And all the rest, which is 60-something people, terrorists, will go back home with no trial, with no interrogants. And he started to argue with me 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, my family in Arabic, of course, so my family got a wag, told me, hey, Dad, your business. But he told me, Avi, let's go down a little bit and I'll come up a little bit. I knew the number he wants to reach, and I said, it's 13, or you call President Bush and solve the problems straight with the President of the United States. And that was the end. The next day, 13 arch-terrorists were expelled to European countries, 26 to Gaza, and the others went home. Terrorists, not even one innocent person. And we took 7 weeks in order not to cause any additional harm that was done by the terrorists themselves. They took hostage, they took the food of the staff of the church. But that shows you an absurd that never mind if you are 15 years after, and as Minister Elkin said, even if it is 1,000 years after, still people prefer to influence the past rather than the future. It's much easier, by the way. And try to imagine that Osama bin Laden would have been a Palestinian, an arch-terrorist Palestinian. And the Palestinian Authority would have paid salary to his family. What would be the reaction of the United States and other European countries? Just try to imagine. The second point in dispute is the status of refugees. I don't know how familiar you are with the details. Let me share my knowledge about it with you. Officially, 50% of the people in both West Bank and Gaza Strip are defined refugees by the United Nations, by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinians only. It's another absurd, by the way. UNRWA takes care only on Palestinian terrorists, which are 5 million Palestinian terrorists, here and worldwide, in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. UNHCR is another United Nations agency who takes care of 57 million refugees worldwide. Now try to think about it. UNHCR, who takes care of 57 million refugees worldwide, runs 10,000 employees. How many employees should run UNRWA that takes care of 5 million refugees? 1,000. Practically, UNRWA has 30,000 employees. In Gaza Strip, it's close to 10,000, which means they pay salaries to Hamas people every month. What's the definition of a refugee? You won't believe it. It's an endless definition. Each one who was here in the area of Israel between June 1946 and May 1948, when Israel was established, in those 2 years, he, his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc., will be defined refugees. You know that in Gaza Strip, 71% of the people are defined officially refugees by UNRWA. There are 8 refugee camps in Gaza Strip. In 1950, the first survey by UNRWA indicated 170,000 refugees in 8 refugee camps. I remember I started my career 40-something years ago in Jabalia refugee camp. Looks like Manhattan from the air, but when you come to the ground, it's really garbage. No rats, by the way. No cats, because the rats are eating the cats, bigger than the cats. And in 1950, there were 170,000 refugees. Today, according to the survey of UNRWA, 520,000 refugees. It's an endless definition. And I'm telling you that, in my eyes, when we are trying to see the history of our region, which is very important to understand the future, everybody starts with 67, as if history, the modern history, started in 67. I don't want to dive into the history of 1,000 years ago, although it has a lot of relevancy to our subject, mainly here in Jerusalem. But let's take the 100 years, the last 100 years. Exactly November 2nd, 1917, Balfour Declaration was given the state of Israel for the Jewish people. It's the third international declaration. I'm not speaking about Napoleon, who gave something declaration, but that's more than 100 years, so let's concentrate on the 100 years. So that's the first. The second was the partition plan. People, including Israelis, that's what surprises me always. Even Israelis are not aware that in 1947, 29th of November 1947, the United Nations Assembly voted for the state of Israel. What kind of state was it? It was a state that was agreed at the partition plan that the Israeli administration, before establishing the country, the same leaders but under different capacity, they accepted the partition plan. Partition plan said 55% to the Jews, 45% to the Arabs. And the Jewish administration accepted it. The first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, accepted it. Can you imagine that in addition to that, Jerusalem, according to the partition plan, was not under Israeli sovereignty? And nevertheless, we accepted it. 2 years after the Holocaust, we had no choice. The Arabs rejected it. They wanted 100% of the land. And they invaded with 7 armies to the tiny country Israel in order to take 100%. God was with the Jews, and we took 78% of the land. And a small part of Jerusalem, the west side of Jerusalem, with not even the most holy places to Judaism, Western Wall, Rachel Tomb, etc. So the war was ended in 1949 at the ceasefire agreements. That's what the 67 line practically. Then we are at the fourth phase, which is 67. What happened in 67? Egypt waged a war against Israel. They blocked the straits to Israel, to the south part of Israel, kicked off all United Nations troops from Sinai and Gaza Strip, and were about to open a war against Israel. And we, in a very simple translation, instead of allowing them to have us for dinner, we took them for lunch. And we waged a war against Egypt. We warned King Hussein, do not open fire. We have no intention to wage a war against Jordan. But Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian president at that time, in a very famous phone call that we tapped it, told him, King Hussein, we are winning the war against Israel in the south. And King Hussein believed it's true. He couldn't believe that he is cheating, that he is lying. And he said, if they are winning the war in the south, it's a good chance for me to get back all Jerusalem. Even the small, tiny part of Jerusalem that Israel took in 48. And he started to open fire. And we returned fire, and it was much easier than was expected. It was not planned. We had no plans to take the West Bank. and not even Jerusalem. And we have to pay the price for their aggression in 49, in 47, in 48, in 67. September 1993, Oslo Accord with the Palestinian Authority that was supposed to be one Palestinian Authority in both West Bank and Gaza Strip, with one law in both and one gun for internal security. 10.5 years ago, Hamas took over in a military coup the Gaza Strip. And while we are arguing about one-state solution, two-state solution, we are living in a three-state solution. The State of Israel, the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and the West Bank by Mahmoud Abbas, and the so-called Palestinian Authority of Hamas in Gaza Strip. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, last time he was in Gaza Strip was 11 years ago. 11 years ago. And Hamas, in 2001, started to be equipped, trained, sponsored by Iran. That's how we go back to Iran. All arsenal of weapons made by Iran was shipped via Egypt, via Sinai Peninsula, into the Gaza Strip. Rockets, Katyusha rockets, know-how, how to build rockets, how to build more accurate rockets. And here, when we talk about Iran, I think we have to say loud and clear, it's my prediction. Iran has a vision, not a dream, a vision. One day, to become the runners and the owners of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. That's the vision. They have time. I heard President Trump mention in his speech a few days ago that Iran is the new North Korea. I beg to differ. I think that Iran, the current regime, they don't see themselves as North Korea. North Korea is a small country compared to Iran. North Korea is 25 million. Iran is 80 million. 80 million people with 1.6 million square kilometer. It's a regional superpower that they see themselves not as North Korea, but as old Persian kingdom under Quraysh 2500 years ago. That's their model. That's what they want to become in our region. And they have time. So they have built strategy, how to reach it. And the strategy speaks about two corridors, a northern corridor and a southern corridor. The northern corridor is well known to you. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Iran with 95% Shiites, Iraq with 65% Shiites, Lebanon with 25% Shiites, but Hezbollah, who practically are dominating Lebanon. And the soft point, the problem was Syria, because Syria has only 2% Shiites. So they needed something to compensate themselves. And who is it? Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad represents a minority of Alawites, 11%. The dominating 75% Sunnis and 10% Christians. And they needed someone to be with them. And it almost succeeded. Up until 6 years ago, when the rebels, Sunnis, tried to topple Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So Iran brought the Revolutionary Guards, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the one that President Trump declared loud and clear, it's a terror organization, which is absolutely accurate. Revolutionary Guards, it represents the state of terror number one in the world, Iran, and that's the executive organization who leads its dreams, fantasies, and operations worldwide. They were sent to Syria and they failed to block the rebels. So they grabbed Hezbollah from Lebanon, who is one of the proxies of Iran, one out of 4 or 5 proxies. We shall elaborate in a minute about them. They brought Hezbollah to Lebanon, to Syria. And Hezbollah in Syria, they've mentioned to block the rebels, not to win the war. But 2 years ago, the Russians came. Up until 2 years ago, when we used to say, the Russians are coming, we meant the movie. But 2 years ago, they came. And they came with an airstrikes on Aleppo, the Hama, the city, with carpet bombings, and they explained everybody what does it mean when the Russians are bombing. And they were the game changer in Syria. Now it's much easier when they go to other cities, Idlib and others. But Iran has their own vision and strategy. So they are trying now. They know that Syria is a soft point. Syria, before the Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, they were 23 million people. Today, if you look at the sites, Syria is only 17 million people. 6 million left Syria to Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon, and Europe. And another 6 million Syrian people are refugees in Syria. Half of the population in Syria are not at home. More than 600,000 Syrians got killed. 500,000 civilians. 2.5 million injured. But Iran has a different view. They are starting to pour what they call the Shiite militia. I call it the Foreign Legion of hundreds of years ago. They brought terrorists from all over, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, former Soviet Union countries. In order to fight for them, they have some tens of thousands of them in Iraq and Syria, and they will try to push them forward as close as possible to the Israeli-Syrian border, the Golan Heights. That's something that we have to block. The proxies is a very interesting way that Iran is running for the 20-something years. It's Hezbollah in Lebanon. By the way, they lost in Syria 1,800 terrorists, which means 8,000 terrorists got injured. It's much more than they've lost in all clashes with the Israeli army during all years. But they have to pay the price because they are a proxy of Iran. The second one is Hamas in Gaza Strip, who for 16 years became a proxy of Iran. Money, training, rockets, and during the 2 years where the Muslim Brotherhood dominated Egypt, they have managed to smuggle from Iran into the Gaza Strip even machines how to build accurate weapons, mainly accurate missiles and rockets. And there is a southern corridor, which starts in Iran and supposed to be ended in Yemen. Yemen was 25 million people. Third of Yemen population are Shiites, Houthis. They conquered Yemen. And when they will stabilize the regime, the Houthis regime in Yemen, if they succeed, then Iran will move to Oman. Oman is a bit smaller in land than Yemen. Yemen is 500,000 square kilometers, and Oman is 400,000 square kilometers. But Oman is 3.5 million people, that's it. It will be very easy once they decided. And then they will sit, Iran, Hormuz Straits, and Bab el-Mandab Straits, who leads to Israel and to the Suez Canal. Two very strategic points. So if I take you backward to what I mentioned in the beginning, the two corridors that they are building, and you see what's in the middle. Iraq is under Iranian influence, almost sovereignty. Syria is, huge part of it is under Iranian influence. Lebanon, due to Hezbollah, under Iranian influence. So what remains before getting into Saudi Arabia? Jordan, piece of cake. And from Yemen, Every week, they are launching of long-range rockets or missiles who reach a distance of 600 to 800 kilometers. Some of them are being shot down by the Patriot missiles, some of them not. We barely hear about it. We know that ISIS used to behead people, and it was well published. It's the same between Houthis in Yemen and along the border with Saudi Arabia. It just, they don't video it. They do it with no video. But it's the same procedure. Because in Islam, for us, it's a bit different. It's a bit strange. It's a bit odd. For them, it's nothing. Islam said, Din Muhammad bisayf, which means Islam by sword. So they don't understand why we are surprised. I would say that if Iran succeeds, it's not going to be only the problem of Israel. It's going to be the problem of Saudi Arabia and Egypt and other Arab countries. That's why those Arab countries are supporting the initiative of President Trump. They understand that Iran is developing over the last years, including the last months, long-range missiles who support to carry a warhead, when they will have it, a nuclear warhead, to a distance of 20 to 2,500 kilometers. Every kid will tell you that it's double the distance between Iran and Israel. So what do they need it for? So Egypt understands that they are a target, and Saudi Arabia understands they are a target, and that's why they are trying to block it by all means. And that's what I believe should be blocked by the leaders and the leader of the superpowers in the world, the United States, European countries, Russia. Israel is not a superpower. Maybe you'll meet, or already met, Israelis, including, I know, some of them in the government and the parliament, that believe that Israel is a superpower. No, we can't be a superpower for a few hours, once in many years. That's it. We are 8.5 million people on a tiny land of 22,000 square kilometers. That's it. We're a strong country. We are a regional superpower. We are not a global superpower. And Iran, in general, is an issue that should be taken as a project by the global superpowers, led by the United States. Because if they will decide, if Iran decides one day to use their weapons, their nuclear weapons, and to hand over dirty bombs to any of those proxies, they will try to be not responsible for what can be done with dirty bombs. And I know that it sounds very difficult, very dramatic, but try to think that Iran for the Middle East is like Hitler for the whole world in the Second World War. Try to imagine Hitler with the nuclear bombs during the Second World War. That's the best way to understand about Iran. Because Iran already said loud and clear, their intention is very clear. In my job, in my former job, any threat has to be measured by two elements: intention and capabilities. Intention was expressed loud and clear by Iran, by the highest leadership of Iran. We intend to destroy the state of Israel, period. Now we have to look for the capabilities, the tools. So we understand if they combine together intention and tools, nuclear bombs, that's a threat. So that's why we have to be, all of us. We shall take care for us as Israel. We are not a global superpower, and the problems of other countries, neighboring countries and others, should be solved by the superpowers, the real superpowers, the United States and the others, And I hope that the initiative that we've seen just recently will continue, because it goes and it leads to the right conclusions and it goes to the right direction. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a brilliant question, because to speak about the Sunnis and unity, it's a bit problematic. You know, a year and a half ago, 19 Arab countries, all of them Muslims, all of them Sunnis, declared Hezbollah as a terror organization. It was a huge surprise. 19 Arab countries, led by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other countries, stated Hezbollah as a terror organization. There are 3 other Arab countries who didn't do it: Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, for very good reasons. Those 3 countries are dominated by Iran. By the way, Palestinian Authority didn't say anything about it, although Palestinian Authority is pure Sunnis. Here and there, a minority, a very small minority of Christians, who is getting smaller and smaller from year to year. I remember I started to work in Shin Bet. Beit Lechem was close to 80% Christians. Today, Beit Lechem is less than 20% Christians. The only country, by the way, in the Middle East, the number of Christians growing up is Israel. But a declaration about Hezbollah is one thing, and confronting the other issues is different. You know, all Arab countries, are horrified by the fact that in Syria, 600,000 people got killed. Mainly Sunnis, mainly civilians. And nevertheless, they did nothing in order to stop it. You know, even Turkey. Turkey is non-Arab country, but it's Muslim and Sunni, the majority. They did almost nothing to stop the bloodshed in Syria. Try to remember just 25, 26 years ago, when the Balkans suffered from a bloodshed and the number of victims reached 100,000, all NATO was in the Balkans in order to stop the bloodshed. Middle East a little bit far from Europe, and that's why not even one country invaded Syria to stop the bloodshed made by Syrian army, Hezbollah, Iran, and the others. Against ISIS, everybody loved to fight, although who fought really were the Kurds, the United States, and that's all. But when I say the vision of Iran is something they are working step by step. When they build the corridor, they try to increase their influence in Sunni countries. Now, it's an inevitable question, how come Israel into the issue? Why Israel became something in the eyes of Iran? We had nothing with Iran. We have two countries buffer between Israel and Iran. We have Jordan and Iraq, or Syria and Iraq. And if you ask me why we became an enemy state of Iran, or Iran became an enemy state of Israel, no reason, except one. Iran understands that in order to gain the support amongst the Arab countries, the best common denominator is Israel. That's why they try to support, or they are supporting Hamas. They support Jihad Palestinian Islamic Jihad for years. Even Turkey, by the way, tried to get involved by sending the flotilla to Gaza Strip in order to create something, because they know that the hatred toward Israel is works very good amongst the Muslims, Sunnis, Arab countries. But when it comes to the final destination, it will take time. But Iran has time. It's unlike many other countries. Iran has two spiritual leaders, Khomeini and the current one, Ali Khamenei, it's since 79, it's almost 40 years. In 40 years, 2 leaders. Which country here in 40 years has only 2 leaders? It's a different situation.
David, Mike, took more questions.
Yeah, I think we were looking for a little more on the southern corridor when you first mentioned it. And is it just, I assume, the conflict in Yemen? Is it pressure on the Arab Gulf states? Is it Iranian Navy up in the Horn of Africa?
You know, it's interesting how Iran activated under the radar for years in Yemen. I remember just 3 years ago, I used to speak about the threat that the Houthis create in Yemen. And people asked me, where did you bring the Houthis from? Who are they? They were unknown. But Iran has a strategy. And when they have decided to build the southern corridor, they know that there are only 2 countries that separate Saudi Arabia from the ocean. And if they create the belt that blocks Saudi Arabia from south, and they will sit on the straits of Bab el-Mandab, they will have 2 very significant straits, Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab. By the way, Bab el-Mandab is much narrower than the Straits of Hormuz. And Saudi Arabia cannot sell any barrel of oil unless it goes either through Bab el-Mandab or Straits of Hormuz. And any carrier of oil doesn't like fire in the middle, in the area. It doesn't work, doesn't go together. So, never mind how big the fleet of the United States or other countries will be, oil will not go because you can block a carrier of oil with a, Fakat RPG, with a very stupid anti-tank rocket or missile. And they have much more than those simple issues. So they have a leverage. And they need Bab el-Mandab to fill the gap because Hormuz Straits is only 50%. There is a pipe that crosses all Saudi Arabia from east to west, to Jeddah. But then it has to go to Bab el-Mandab. So I think that Iran knows that they have to be very careful about becoming the enemy of too many countries, mainly superpowers countries, like the United States, like Russia, like European countries, like China. And that's why they decided to put off the nuclear development and to delay it for 8 to 10 years. It's nothing, 8 to 10 years, compared to their vision that might take maybe hundreds of years. So that's why they are very smart, very clever. We cannot be naive. I mean, in my 40-something years, 46 years in security, I've learned that the main problem of the democratic countries and the Western world is the naivete. Sometimes we simply do not understand the Arabs. Sometimes we do not understand the Muslim regimes. They think different. And we take them as if it's democracy. I remember President Bush, when he brought the roadmap in 2003, he was sure it's going to be ended with 2 years. With 2 years. It couldn't happen. It's like pregnancy that should last 2 days. It doesn't work. Biologically, it doesn't work. And today, we have to be very careful. Iran is shooting very, very extreme declarations. but they are threatened quite well. Don't take the statements of the leadership of Iran as if nothing bothers them. No, no, they are very, very nervous about the fact that the American leadership means business. They know that 80 million people in Iran, huge part of it are very intellectual people. And they know that with a poor economy, they're going to dive into different problems. Look what happened in Gaza Strip. Hamas, who 10 years ago became the ruler of Gaza, so instead of being just a terror organization like Hezbollah, who is taking care of its own people, has to take care of 2 million people in Gaza with food, water, electricity, and all the others. They're not well prepared for it. They don't know how to do it. They don't have the capability, the budget, etc. And Iran understood if the people are going to be in an economic problem, it's going to create new issues that they don't like to do. So that's why they agreed to the agreement, and they have got the best agreement they could get, part of the naivete. When Prime Minister Netanyahu stated 2 years ago, it's a bad deal, trust me, in an eye of someone who understands it from the operational side, he was absolutely right. Today, it's very easy to understand it. But, you know, we are always, as Israelis, I don't know in other countries, in Israel, we always have too many people who try to see issues only in the worst case scenario. And I recommend us, you know, we have some opportunities. If right pressure is going to be put by the relevant countries, mainly by the United States, we can reach some achievements. But to think that everything is going to lead to the worst case scenario, you know, it reminds me of the story of, in Israel, the jokes are about Polish people. We have my parents from Poland, and we said that a Polish couple is going to the doctor to get the results of an MRI test of the woman. And when they came to the clinic, so the wife said to her husband, Jacek, you go to the doctor and bring me the results. I'm too nervous to go by myself. So she stood in the car, and he went to the doctor, half an hour, an hour. After 2 hours, he comes out. She said, where have you been 2 hours? He said, Bronya, we are going back home, and we'll speak about it at home. She said, no, 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 you're not moving with the car unless you give me the results here and now. And he looked at her and said, Bronya, the doctor said, your mother is moving to live with us. Said, what the doctor has to know who's my mother? He doesn't know her. He said, I don't know. He said we have to be prepared for the worst case scenario.
I think it's the right time to say Toda Rabba to Avi Dichter.